Welcome to our last installment of Chapter 14 and 15, Advantages and Disadvantages of Nuclear Energy. Here we go. So nuclear power, we are using radioactive materials to create heat energy. We are using uranium and plutonium, usually uranium. We have a lot of uranium here in the United States. We'll talk about that later. So the first question I have for you is, are we using nuclear fusion or nuclear fission to generate this heat energy? Think about it. No, that's not it. There you go. That's right. Nuclear fission. Good job. Give yourself a round of applause. Nuclear fusion is what happens on the surface of the sun. We are currently experimenting with nuclear fusion. We are incapable of producing it at any meaningful quantity at this point because the energy and the temperatures needed to kickstart this are phenomenal. The surface of the sun is 10 million degrees Celsius. So, you need a lot of heat energy to do that. But one day, hopefully, we would be able to use nuclear fusion because we could produce lots and lots of energy with very, very little waste. And it would be great. We could power the world. All right, so nuclear fission is what we're using. Nuclear reactors, we are using uranium. We have these uranium rods. I'll show you on the next slide what they look like. What's going on in these nuclear chain reactions? We have a neutron which then smashes into the nucleus of the next atom and so on and so forth. And all these explosions lead to just massive releases of energy. That energy is released as heat, which then produces steam, which then turns a turbine. And we'll get there in a second. This is what this assembly looks like. We've got a fuel pellet made of uranium, which is then stacked into a fuel rod, and these fuel rods are then put together in assembly. If you want to generate electricity, all these together create that a significant chain reaction which produces a significant quantity of heat. If you want the reaction to speed up, these fuel cells are in a pool of water. You raise that assembly out of the water, the reaction speeds up, you generate more steam. If you want it to slow down because it's not peak energy demand, maybe it's not Super Bowl Sunday and everyone's not watching their TV, then you lower it or submerge it back into the water, slows down the reaction, and you produce less steam and less electricity. What's going on? When you put all of this stuff together, these fuel cells into rods, into assemblies, right? Again, you're trying to generate steam. That steam, just like all of our non-renewable fuel sources, coal, oil, natural gas, we're burning them, and we're using the heat to produce steam. Same thing in a nuclear reactor, except we're not burning anything. We just have these nuclear fission reaction that's taking place, and it's releasing this heat energy that generates the steam. But we're trying to produce steam nonetheless. That steam turns a turbine, right, which is nothing more than copper, usually copper wires, spinning within magnets, right, which then starts moving electrons, right, which then that's what we're harnessing, the movement of those electrons which is the electricity. So, advantages. No air pollution. Again, like I said, I think in some of the other lectures, if a nuclear reactor is operating properly, the only thing being released is water vapor, right? No nuclear radiation, nothing else. No carbon dioxide, no carbon monoxide, no methane, CH4. Highly concentrated energy. Each fuel pellet, remember, each pellet was put into the rod, and then you have the assembly. So each pellet is equal to 0.9 metric tons of coal or 4 barrels of oil. So very concentrated, and we have a large fuel supply. We actually produce some of the uranium here in Florida. We have phosphate mines here, and when they're mining the phosphate, there's very small quantities of uranium, but you can concentrate those out and then use them in these fuel assemblies. Something that's concern, some people are under the impression that if a terrorist were to hit a nuclear reactor, it would blow up like an atomic bomb. Now, it would be bad nonetheless because it would release massive quantities of radiation into the U.S., but it would not blow up like an atomic bomb because the fuel rods, each fuel cell is only 3.5% uranium, which is not nearly concentrated enough to act anywhere near an atomic weapon. All right, so those are 90+%. So we are only 3.5% uranium in these fuel cells. Disadvantages: high cost. The cost requirements to build these power plants are quite significant because you have to contain all this radiation, which requires massive quantities of concrete, lots and lots of lead, and even more concrete. So those stacks, right, the concrete stacks that come up that come from the area where the fuel rods are housed and then into the steam, right, which separates them from that fuel assembly, 12 feet of concrete, a foot layer of lead, right, and then another 12 feet of concrete to keep all of that contained. So high cost. Thermal water pollution. To cool it down, they have to suck in water from, because they're usually located near a river or the ocean, so they can suck water in to absorb a lot of the heat, the excess heat that they have, and then it's becomes an output, right? So it's a point source pollution of thermal heat energy. So yes, the manatees may love it when they come up, but it often characterizes the whatever waterway they're in with that warm water, high algae growth, which then leads to the breakdown of that algae by bacteria. They suck water out. They suck oxygen out of the water, so it leads to hypoxia or oxygen poor zones. And fish kills, plus the excess heat. Right, hot water has a harder time holding on to dissolved gases. So it's just being heated, it's off-gassing some of that dissolved oxygen. So there's a problem there. Nobody wants to transport this radioactive waste. What do we do with this radioactive waste? After 15 to 60 years of operation, the nuclear reactor becomes dangerously contaminated with radioactive material, which causes the brittling and wearing down of many of the parts. So you have to renovate it or decommission it, and then if you decommission it, you just basically cap the entire thing with more concrete and lead, and it just stays there because we have no way of dealing with this radioactive waste. Radiation kills. What do we do with the spent fuel rods? Plutonium has a half-life of 10,000 years. Sorry, I should say uranium has a half-life of 10,000 years. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So this stuff is so toxic for 10,000 and 24,000 years. What do we do with it? How do we house it? That's a huge thing to think about. Right now we have on-site these dry storage casks, again, which are these canisters made primarily out of lead and concrete, and we store it on-site at these nuclear power plants. We had discussed, like I was there, the nation discussed putting them in a portion of the Sierra Nevada mountains, drilling this huge cave, and they started doing it and then doing preliminary studies, but it was shot down during Obama's administration, because there's a lot of pushback from the areas surrounding there, not wanting them and saying, okay, you're going to put this stuff in there, this radioactive waste, and then what if there's an earthquake? What if something happens and these things leak and then it gets into the groundwater? Then we're the ones paying for it. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but we've never built anything in mankind's life that has been able to survive 10,000 years. And that doesn't mean that after 10,000 years it's not radioactive anymore. That means we just have half of the radioactive material, right? So, what do we do with this waste? That's the problem. And then we have some of these explosions, like the Fukushima Daiichi, which you guys I'm sure remember hearing. 6 reactors, 3 were shut down. Reactors 1, 2, and 3 had a full meltdown, which led to hydrogen explosions with that heat separating. Sometimes it gets so intense it separates the hydrogen in the water. So you have hydrogen gas, oxygen gas. The hydrogen led to this massive explosion. They filled the reactors with seawater to cool them, knowing that the seawater would then be exhausted back out because they were trying to avoid any more meltdown. So they had to flood it with seawater to cool it. However, the seawater is leaking back out into the ocean. So they have had recorded fish kills, of course, but not only fish that were dead, but fish that were radioactive swimming across the Pacific Ocean from Japan to California. And they were telling people, all right, these fish, who migrate through that pattern, don't eat them because they're too radioactive to eat. No good. And of course, you have Chernobyl, which took place in Ukraine in 1986. There was a steam explosion that led to a fire, which led to a series of explosions, and finally a core meltdown. Ukraine did not want to say anything about this because it was this huge catastrophe, and they kept their mouths on it. And it wasn't until other countries in the European Union, not the European Union then, but in Europe started noticing this radioactivity drifting over them, that they finally, after 3 days, said, okay, it was us. We had a meltdown. So, it wasn't necessarily catastrophic, but had they said something, then we could have saved a lot of lives, because they kept their mouth shut. And what was going on in that town was a fair, just happened to be in town during that time. So they didn't say anything, and all the people continued to go to the fair over those 3 days and expose themselves to serious quantities of radiation. Some parts of Chernobyl region will remain contaminated with hazardous levels of radioactivity for 100 years or more, and residents have suffered from high levels of cancerous tumors and other birth defects. These are twin brothers who their mother was pregnant with them at the time. They're 16 years old in this picture. This guy suffers from hydrocephalus, which is just an enlargement of the brain due to excess fluid in the brain. And his brother, Vladimir, has cognitive issues and is deaf as a result of the radiation exposure. 2005 report prepared by the Chernobyl Forum, led by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the World Health Organization, concluded that there were 56 direct deaths, 47 accident workers, and 9 children with thyroid cancer. Estimated that as many as 9,000 people among the approximately 6.6 million most highly exposed may die from some form of cancer. And specifically, the report cited 4,000 thyroid cancer cases among children diagnosed by 2002. A lady who used to work here, Miss Barnett, you may have had her, it seems, I don't know, maybe. She was in the 100-mile exclusion zone, and she, as a result, cannot have children of her own because it damaged her ovaries, and she has to have her thyroid checked every single year to make sure that it does not develop into thyroid cancer. So why do we worry about thyroid, and why do we see so much? Thyroid is an organ in your body that for some reason it just concentrates. It just sucks up all of the radiation that you get exposed to. So for some reason it takes it in more than any other organ. So when these people were exposed to this radiation, it got concentrated into their thyroid, and then it becomes cancerous. So these people have it removed. They go in, and now they're orthoscopic surgery can go in and remove it, leaving very little scarring. But back in the 80s and 90s, they couldn't. So they called it the Chernobyl necklace. They would cut you open and take out your thyroid, and you were left with this big scar across your neck. Still an 18-mile exclusion zone around Chernobyl today, which has been some of it has been blocked in and concreted over. There's a tribute to the people who died during the going in trying to stop as much of this radiation from getting out as possible. This is in 2012. Where do we have nuclear power plants? In Florida, we have one in Crystal River, which is an hour and a half southwest of Ocala. We have one in St. Lucie, one in Turkey Point near Miami, and a new one is being built in Levy County. If you are going to the University of Florida, there's also a small nuclear power plant on campus because they have a nuclear engineering program, so they have one on campus for people to work at and to study. So we have 4.5 nuclear power plants in the state of Florida. And that is it. We're done.